I want to explain something.
Yeah.
Okay, everyone noticed that I'm wearing the Chiefs jersey. I'm always happy to represent my teams, but we had a bet. My son is part owner of Chiefs, he's the operations manager of Chiefs, and he and I have a bet that if my Halo team, Mind Freak, finish lower than Chiefs' Halo team, I have to wear the jersey. And so this won't be decided until after today's talk, but I'm just getting my obligations in just in case. I don't mind having a bit of a bet with them. All right, it's going off now.
Thank you everyone for joining us today for the very first PocketPsych podcast / panel here at Dreamhack Melbourne. Today we're going to be talking about sports psychology and esports. We'll go through and introduce everyone, but first, who knows what esports psychology is? Anyone across it? Okay, cool. This is going to be great. So first up, I'm James. I go by DevMarta online. I mostly do esports commentating and presenting, so I am not the expert when it comes to this. And that is why we have Michelle. Now, Michelle, would you like to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about what you do?
I'm the esports psychologist here. So I have a background in traditional sport, 35 years of traditional sport before I started in esports. And as I said earlier, my son was the one that got me involved in esports. He had a team that wanted a sports psychologist to work with him, and he said, I know just the person to ask. So 2019, I started working with the Chiefs CS team. Well, actually, it was Tainted Minds in those days, but that's where I sort of started and realised how much I loved esports. So I've only been in here 3 years, but what I do works. So I want to share some of those secrets with you.
And esports and sports do have a lot of crossover. Rowan, you yourself are very aware of that. I mean, where to begin? Paralympian, OAM. Do you want to just maybe talk a little bit about what you do? Introduce yourself.
So my name's Rowan Crothers. Online I go by Magnet Brain. I am a man that just loves competition. So I've won 2 gold medals at the Paralympic Games in swimming, as well as 3 world championship titles, broken a bunch of world records, all that stuff in the pool. But I love esports as well, particularly the fact that it's a team-based game, and I can't participate in traditional team-based sports due to the fact that we're all very high contact, and with my disability and everything, I just can't do that. So I love esports. I've played both.
Do you want to say what disability that is?
Sure, good idea. I have cerebral palsy, so it's a kind of brain damage that impairs my fine motor skills and coordination and stuff. It's like affecting how my brain communicates with my body through the nervous system. But with esports, I've played both Counter-Strike and Valorant at a very high level in the oceanic scene. I got to about teams in the top 10 in CS, and good old Pants Down, which is where I met Michelle. We got to about top 3 to top 4 in OCE as well. So way back, but good times.
So what is sports psychology and what is esports psychology? I'm definitely not qualified to answer that question, so Michelle.
Okay, can you put this next slide on, please, James?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Sports psychology uses these sorts of traditional sort of techniques, or these are the sort of issues that I would usually see my clients for. A lot of them to do with, how do they cope with anxiety in traditional sports? How do they perform better that way? Then, setting the right sort of goals is really important. They're probably the key ones. And then, there's some more smaller sort of areas that I would spend time on with my traditional sport athletes. And in sports psychology, the idea is that you try and look after all the little things you possibly can in order to maximise performance. So I'm really interested in looking at patterns of behaviour. What is it that people think, do and say that lead to good performance and get them to do it more often? And what is it they think, do and say that doesn't lead to good performance and get them to do it less often? So a lot of my work is to do, now if you have the slide for esports, it's exactly the same, it's exactly the same skills, but now involving with comms. And so my major role in in esports psychology is to listen to my players' comms, to hear how they are reacting to or giving information to their teammates, how they're relating to each other as teammates, and trying to create a good culture where it's happy and friendly and everyone wants to be there. And we had the best time on Pants Down, let me tell you. And also maximising performance that way. Because if players are really happy to be there, then they're going to have a longer career and the team is going to stick together, and this is what helps teams perform at their best, is by sticking together through thick and thin, knowing they've got their backs of their teammates and they've got theirs. So that's how it all works. So it's the same layers of issues, but now looking at comms to see how people are relating. That's how I work mostly.
So essentially, your job is to make sure that athletes, esports or sports athletes, have everything they need to do the best job possible, to perform.
Right, and so a lot of my teams call me mum, and I don't like that because it undermines. I mean, yeah, I love all my players like my sons, or my brothers, maybe my sons. I love them really a lot, and I care about them a great deal. But I have the skills to help them actually be effective, and that's sort of sets me apart from, say, managers or other adults in the room.
Yeah, and you were talking about the difference between sports and esports, and you highlighted one thing, communication skills. So in esports, there are some overlaps and some things that are a bit different, but communication, like you said, is one of the most important. Rowan, can you think of any examples of what's it like communicating in an esports team? Like, what does that experience like, and what are the kinds of things that, in your experience, can go wrong?
Well, I've had a lot of good and bad experiences on teams, with communication things especially. And one thing that I didn't realise for a very long time until I started working with Michelle and working with Team Pants Down was the importance of something as simple as using each other's actual names. So when you're on a first name basis with everyone, like, you don't just become closer as a team with better culture and everything, but there's also that effect which is kind of like when you're in a busy room and everyone's mingling, but you hear someone say your name and it stands out and you hear it, and then not only does the thing they say after that, like if I'm going to say, hey, Twiz, or hey, Cover, go do this and that, if I say, hey, Sam, or hey, Chris, or hey, Hawani, or whoever these guys are, and then follow up with the communication, not only is it more effective because they're more likely to hear and process the information that you give them, but it also just creates a closer and a more personal bond between everyone on the team.
The way I explain it is that when you're in a team, you want your inside team people to be known by their first names, and they're the bond you have with your team. And everyone outside your team knows you by your in-game name. And so by having that sort of separate, it, as Rowan said, it creates a really great team bonding experience. A lot of teams are very reluctant to give up their in-game names because they say, oh, I've been using it for 4 years, or I'm only known by this or whatever. But inside the team, you're brothers, and you feel so much closer. And teams say, oh, I don't want to give up my in-game name. And I say, give it 12 weeks, 3 months. If you don't like it, you can revert, and no one's reverted yet. They really do feel so much stronger together using their own names within their own team.
So esports and regular sports do have a lot of crossover, like we were talking about, and a lot of these things on the screen. Firstly, regulating emotions. What kinds of things do you do with your teams and your players to help them do that? And why is that important, Lena? What's the problem? What can go wrong?
Okay, well, this is going to be the subject of our next podcast, James.
Ah.
So I don't want to go into too much detail right now, but we're really talking about knowing what is the energy level required of an event, and for the player to meet the energy level. If they're too low, they need to raise their energy levels up a bit more, or if they're too high, they need to lower them down. And so there are techniques that we can use to moderate, how energized we feel. A lot of them, if you need to be calmer, then, taking 3 deep breaths is the key number one thing to do, so that you can think clearly and react fast. It's a lot of my players will. Actually, my Halo team yesterday, I've got 2 players on my team who just said all that stuff that you talked about, reducing stress. They were doing the deep breathing during the very pressured situations, and they said work's a treat. So give it a try to try and lower lower the stress levels and to increase the energy level. Well, we'll talk about that one next podcast.
Well, Rowan, you've competed at the very highest level with swimming. Is this something that you've experienced as well, needing to have specific techniques?
I think that one thing that's extremely different actually with swimming as opposed to esports is that in swimming, ultimately, although you do so much training and everything, when it comes to race day, you're practicing a heavily pre-rehearsed and prepared routine, which is very different to esports where every single game, every match, every round is totally different. But I think a lot of the stuff as far as being able to regulate your emotions is important. But the thing that I've found is much more prevalent, is dealing with obstacles and things that come up. Because when it comes to elite level competition, when you're traveling internationally, things always go wrong. Like, it always hits the fan, honestly. And the thing that makes the best athlete on the day is very, very rarely who has had the best preparation in the 6 months leading up to an event. More often, it's the ones that can best adapt to changes in circumstances, best adapt to things like COVID lockdowns coming through where you can no longer use a dining hall at a Paralympic village because everyone else uses the dining hall, so it's a possible COVID hotspot. It's like being able to adapt to those kinds of obstacles and challenges that generally makes you the better competitor at the elite level where everyone is almost as good as each other.
Yeah. All right.
Can I jump in the question? Rowan, on a swimming meet competition day, can you give an example where you've had to go to a plan B, where you thought you had things under control and suddenly a plan B has had to come in?
So I guess one example was a swimming competition I raced at a while ago where at a swimming pool, generally you have a racing pool and you have a warm-up, warm-down pool as well. So you jump in the warm-up, warm-down pool, you do your 20 or 30-minute warm-up before the race, and then you get going for the race. You head to a marshalling room for 20 minutes and then you compete. I've had so many competitions where things have happened like, let's say I arrive late because a bus breaks down and I have to find an alternative warm-up strategy because I don't get 20 minutes or half an hour to warm up. I may only get 5 or 10. I've had times where the warm-up pool has been closed because they've screwed up the pool chemicals and there's too much chlorine and it's a health hazard to get in there. A lot of stuff particularly related to that window right before the race where all of a sudden I can no longer do my proper preparation like immediately before. So then it's just saying, all right, what is my plan B? What can I do for dry land kind of activation outside of the pool? And how can I use that to kind of make sure that ultimately the whole goal of a warm-up is to just warm your body up, to get your muscles ready and firing and ready to go. And also that psychological element of saying, okay, I've done what I've had to do. I've done my pre-race routine, so now I'm ready to race. I just make sure that my pre-race routine is very, very flexible. So no matter what goes wrong, I always have other backup plans and other options so I can always be just as ready to compete.
Always have a plan B, folks.
I have a plan XYZ, honestly.
Yeah, that's right.
So could you speak a little bit to how you might use sports psychology in both your esports context as well as the swimming?
Yeah, so as Michelle said, a massive thing that I found with working with her, originally I'm probably skipping to a forward question here, but whatever. I started working with Michelle because I thought that the other players on the Valorant team I was with, Team Pants Down, could gain a lot from working with a sports psychologist after seeing the gains that it had made within my own sport, in large part through a lot of dealing with setbacks and goal setting and all that kind of thing. But I had absolutely no idea that most of the work was in communication strategies. But it makes so much sense that in a team-based game, there's no shortage of players that are extremely skilled, have cracked aim or whatever it is. but it's the ability to actually work together as a team that creates a better team that wins more rounds, wins more matches, and so on. So although there are a lot of those kinds of similarities with things, like it is very important to be able to set proper, effective goals, to be intrinsically motivated, all those kinds of things. The communication stuff is so different to anything that I've seen within swimming.
I want to ask you something again. I'm sure that you'll have something to input on this, Michelle, but I kind of want to throw Rowan under the bus first. Why should you or your team work with a sports psychologist in the first place?
I have a bunch of theories behind that, honestly. I think
Go for it.
one of the big things is that building of communication skills. Put frankly, a lot of gamers that get online do not have very good communication skills. Like we spend all our time playing CS or Valorant or League or whatever instead of going outside and talking to people. So it's something that I know a lot of people struggle with. I know I struggled with for a very long time as well. It is building up those communication skills and everything. But I think outside of it, it's all those other things that it relates to understanding where your own performance is at and trying to figure out everything that you can do within your power to be able to be a better competitor. That's what an esports psychologist or a sports psychologist really does. It's not a feel-good thing to make sure you're happier when you compete. It's actually about how do you become a better competitor and how do you get the most out of your own individual potential or your team's potential to be their best.
You gave an anecdote about your Halo team earlier and when they actually said to you, we use your technique. Is that happening a lot with you and your teams?
Of course, James.
Yeah?
They're good boys and girls, the ones I work with. So they usually listen to what I have to say. I have started with some teams who are a little reluctant and they think, I'm already pretty successful. I don't know what she can add. And they don't use me the right way. And it's probably a good conversation to start right now and talk about how I work as an esports psychologist compared to maybe most of my other colleagues. So for me, I'm older than most people in esports and my kids are grown up and I get to choose what I want to do with my life now. So I've made a full-time career now in esports. Quite recently, I left my full-time lecturing job last May. But I forgot where I was going to go with this.
Talking about your teams and how you work in esports?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I don't have the pressures now of, spending a lot of money raising my kids because they're already grown up. And so long as my bills are paid, I'm quite happy. So the way I work with teams is to listen to comms and listen to scrims and officials, and that's how I work. And while I'm listening to my teams, I'm introducing all those concepts we saw that pie chart from. So, how do you control your arousal levels for competition? How do you set the right goals? Are we avoiding burnout? All those sorts of things. And they come up naturally in conversations with my team just for me looking out for them. So I would usually attend, as I said, as many of the scrims as I possibly could each week. And probably my colleagues are more likely to be in their 30s or maybe 20s or 30s, and they're just starting out in their career and they don't have a lot of experience yet, and they have other full-time commitments with family and jobs, and so their work in esports is often to do with coming in, being called in as a consultant and trying to fix a team when there's already a problem, and then they walk away again because they're paid maybe on an hourly rate, and that's all the org wants to get out of them. So just walking in and walking out, I don't think is a good long-term strategy. I like to work with my teams a bit more hands-on than that. So I don't know. Teams, how do you feel about someone sitting in on scrims all the time?
It's something that I found personally I was pretty comfortable with it. I know a lot of the other boys that were on Pants Down struggled a lot with it at first because it's like, who's this old lady that's sitting in our scrims or whatever? And I think they were all pretty unsure about what there was to really gain out of it.
What the value was, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that the value add was absolutely massive, not just in terms of our own team skill and ability. as 5 players, we were all good at Valorant, but we came from totally different games and background. Like we had like 3 Fortnite players, and then RDW, who had 0 experience within any form of professional esports,
As
and
a
just
team, yeah,
and just
as a
played a
team.
bunch of retake servers and Counter-Strike. And then you have me, the fish. So it's all these Fortnite players and a fish, pretty much. But we reached such a high level of skill, but we also created such an incredibly strong bond and team culture, in large part through the things that we did to, create that culture, and like working with you and making sure that we have good communication. We air our dirty laundry early, and we do it effectively in a manner that is constructive, to make sure the issues that come up are kind of dealt with and then moved beyond, so that we can focus on what they're actually there to do, which is to get better and to try to win.
I think for me, my first run-in with esports psychology was I was working Rainbow Six Siege and casting these teams and interviewing one of the players, Digital, who competed for the Chiefs. And he said, we've got this esports psychologist called Michelle, and she's doing all this work for us. And he had a lot of specific things that he pointed to and said, this is how she's helping us, and this is how it's affecting our results. What are the specific things that players come to you and say, you told me about this, and I felt it, and I actually noticed it?
Well, depending on what sort of questions everyone asks, I've got some slides to talk about, how you actually target different things you want to improve. So
you want to save that for later?
Yeah, save it for later.
All right. Well, why don't we start diving a bit more into yourself, Rowan? So what do you think are the main tools in terms of sports psychology, that you look to when it comes to swimming? You talked about your routines getting into the pool or before the pool and when things might go wrong. What are the specific techniques that you would be using from a psychological perspective?
The big thing is honestly adaptability, and just understanding that, as I said before, things will always go wrong in elite competition, and it's just understanding how to change that to make sure that regardless of the circumstances, you can always compete at a higher level. One of the other things is also the overall approach behind what it is that I'm trying to do with my sport. I think it's very easy to say you want to be the best in the world, or you want to be the best you can be, or whatever. But I feel like with those two, if you want to be the best in the world, even if you're really, really good and you become the best in the world, then what's next, right? So you spend so long being miserable because you're not the best in the world and that's all you want to be. And then you finally get there and you go from being upset to just being, okay, that's cool, but what now? Whereas then if you're trying to be the best that you can be, then you can work towards that every day. And as long as you're doing the best that you can, you'll feel better. But the thing that I realized recently is that even if you're trying to be the best you can be, you can reach a point where you can say, all right, I did the best I can, and that's it. And you stop looking for ways to actually improve and get better. So one of the big things in my approach now is to say, instead of trying to be the best in the world or trying to be the best that I can be, I'm just trying to be better and trying to make sure every day with what it is that I'm doing, whether it is within swimming and like training sessions or competitions, or it is within esports playing Valorant, that everything I'm doing is just about trying to get better and trying to hone and perfect my craft. I think one of the beautiful things with both sports and esports is perfection is impossible. There is always things you can do to improve and always things to get better. And that's where I think that best is a limiting term, because it's impossible. So just focus on getting better, and then Bob's your uncle.
You've reached a good point there, because I want to talk about the role of perfectionism. I have lots of players who tell me, I'm aiming for it to be perfect. And it's such a weight to carry, because the goal of perfection is, if it's hard to attain it, and you're always then going to be critical of yourself. I'm very keen in my teams to make sure that players are giving credit to their teammates when they're, doing good plays, and it's not just about working on the things that need to be fixed. It's about celebrating the wins that we get as well, and just being critical the whole time is depressing, to be honest. So trying to find some fun is very important in a team.
Definitely. I think it's one of those things where regardless of the level that you're at, the title you play, the sport that you do, it is sport. And life's too short to spend every waking moment and hour doing something that you don't enjoy and that you're not having fun doing. So being able to stop and smell the roses when something really cool happens, or like, you know, you win a cool award in swimming, or you win a tournament match, or even in the middle of the match if someone hits like a nice clip. I think it's important to be able to stop for a moment and like celebrate that. But I think in the moment, in the middle of a match, it's something that, going back to a bit of what we're talking about before with like those levels, you need to be careful and say, okay, if someone absolutely pops off and hits like a 1v5 ace in CS or in Valorant, that's great. You need to celebrate that. Like, yeah, let's go. But you need to be able to reset as well and get back to that baseline, because otherwise you'll be so high and you'll be riding this high of everything being awesome. But in the nature of esports, every single game is so volatile. You can have upset rounds. And if you get upset, you crash. And then it's a lot harder to then try and build back up to that baseline and hold there.
So my question here is, how did a self-described fish end up with an esports psychologist? What's the origin story? How did you two actually meet? What was that reaction? What was it like when you were like, oh, I met this lady and she's an esports psychologist?
Do you remember?
I remember the whole thing. So way back when I'd done all my Counter-Strike experience, I met Michelle in Valorant. Actually, a bit before working in Valorant, it was on Twitter. So one of my really old swimming training partners did either his bachelor's or his master's in sports psychology. And one of his like papers that he did was this idea of a sports psychology, like an esports psychology toolkit.
You sent me his thesis.
Yeah.
It's quite long. I read it.
Being like, hey, what do you think? Like, is this interesting? Is he right? Because I thought he had some very valid points in there at first, where a lot of the stuff was about like understanding internal motivations and goal setting and everything. And Michelle pretty much threw it out the window.
I liked a lot of it.
Like a lot of it was good, but there wasn't that much of a focus on the communication aspect.
And also on how you do it.
Yeah.
It wasn't very practical. It was very theoretical and not very practical. So I would have liked to have seen more practice to it, but that's okay.
Yeah. So Michelle and I had this conversation on Twitter for a while about all of this, because I'm not a sports psychologist. I've had many meetings and appointments with sports psychologists through my own adventures in sport. And we're just talking about all of our own little theories and stuff. And then ultimately, as I'm starting with this Valorant team, I'm saying to myself, hey, I think it'd be really, really great to bring Michelle on board and to work with us. So me being someone that had saved up a lot of money to go on a holiday after the Paralympics, but then the Paralympics being postponed due to COVID, meant I've got a bunch of money that's sitting here doing nothing, and I want to do something really cool with Valorant.
Yeah, because Panstan didn't have an org.
No,
so
we didn't have an org.
funding.
We had no external sponsors or support or anything.
So Rowan was the bank.
Yeah, I bankrolled Michelle. I paid for Michelle. Like, I had mates rates at
You
this point.
got a bargain
so,
those days, let me tell you.
Oh, it was good, trust me. But I think that we not only did we have a really good run in the game, like we went from being a random team to being one of the top 3, top 4 teams in the region, which is very, pretty damn commendable. I think that we absolutely could have taken it further, except the point that we got to in Pants Down, we had kind of a fork in the road for everyone. As lockdowns were starting to lift, people had to start going back to jobs. I had to return to swimming. And frankly, we just didn't have that level of support that we kind of needed to justify pursuing it in a more full-time capacity, which is something that's kind of heartbreaking to think about. But now, like, I'm best mates with everyone on that team. Michelle and I are really close, and we've just built these absolutely incredible friendships. And in that capacity, I wouldn't change a damn thing.
Our Discord channel is, 2.5 years old or something, and we still talk on it.
Yeah. Our Discord's still active, even though we haven't been a team for 2 years. We disbanded in November 2020. And up until that point, something that I'm very proud of, and also I think to great credit Michelle was a key contributing factor for. At the time, we were the longest standing Valorant roster. One thing with esports and teams being so volatile, there's always roster shifts. There's often this mentality that if it doesn't work in this team, it'll work with a different team. And there's a lot of that individuality of saying, all right, I'm going to chop and change between different teams and climb the ladder in that respect. Whereas what we said in Pants Down was that's kind of the enemy of true development, because it's a team game. You need to be able to improve as a team. You're not going to be able to like cookie cutter all this stuff across different people and then make it work at anywhere near as an effective level at the end of like the day. So I think that something that Michelle was really incredible with was kind of diffusing some of those really sticky situations that you always have in a competitive environment to make sure that we stayed friends and we stuck together.
It worked.
Yeah.
Good. So when you did move more into the esports space, because how long have you been swimming for?
Competitively, I started in about 2010.
And how long have you been doing esports for?
I started esports in about 2018, I think, trying to take it more seriously and competitively.
So you had about 10 years there where you had all of this traditional sports experience at an incredibly high level, and you were looking to transition that into esports. What were the things that you already, before even meeting Michelle, you had that you could bring over?
Yeah, I think one of the really big things was that growth-based mindset and that understanding that, you need to be able to put all of your own personal energy into honing your craft and your skills and actually taking that kind of process-based approach to skill development. Something within swimming is that there's always so many different things that you can work on, and you're always working with a coach that helps you identify these things and help you develop these things. Whereas in esports, a lot of the time, even some of the absolute best players in the world and your major teams like, your TSMs, Cloud9s, G2s, they log on and they scrim, then they log off and they just play the game. They just grind the game again and again and again and keep playing it because they're addicted or what have you. But I don't think that's actually a very healthy way to go about doing things, because there's a high risk of burnout. But I don't think it's very effective, because why would you just keep on doing the same thing hoping to get better when you can be very specific about saying, okay, yeah, I might play a couple of ranked games, but in these ranked games, I'm going to spend every single moment thinking about the positioning in these different locations, and I'm going to try experiment with different strategies and see what works, what doesn't. I'm going to try and identify every mistake that I make and then think about how I can do it better. It's taking that process-based approach to always thinking about how can I improve on what I'm doing. That gets you better, because if you're not thinking about how to get better, how the hell can you get better, right?
So Michelle, you'd worked with a lot of different athletes before, and then you worked in esports with someone who had all this traditional sporting experience. What was that like working with Rowan? How is it different to everyone else that you'd worked with in esports?
Don't say anything too bad, please.
A lot of my clients in traditional sports over the years have been like single athletes, not in a team. So Rowan grabbing me to go and work it with Pants Down and Chiefs in Avant before that. My history in esports is quite small. So at that point when Rowan nabbed me, I'd probably only been in esports just over 12 months, or maybe 14 months or so. And so the idea of working with individuals within a team is really attractive, but then working as the team to make them all work together. I liken it to like being a shepherd, with the dogs, and you think that you've got your sheep all... Sorry, Ron, the sheep. You think you've got your sheep all moving in one direction, suddenly one makes a bolt for it, and you've got to send the dog out to get them again and wheel them back in again. So you want to get your team moving in the right direction, but you work with individual players on their own strengths and skills, and that's where it comes as well.
I think with the nature of esports, sometimes it feels a bit more like herding cats.
Yes, herding cats is good too.
Yeah. All right. So, Rowan, when you started to get a little bit more involved with Michelle and working with her, what were the things that surprised you about elite sports psychology and esports psychology? I mean, you could also talk to your swimming experience as well, because you've worked with quite a few sports psychologists before, right?
I've worked with heaps. None of them I've been mates with, like with Michelle. I think that the things that have always really surprised me has been the potential to use those really negative down moments as fuel for growth and like catalysts for change and everything. The thing that I realized looking back on the things that have happened in my swimming career is that the absolute best moments that have created in the long run my greatest and like proudest achievements have been my biggest failures or downfalls or mishaps or what have you. And it's the thing that when you think about it at first, you hear that and it's counterintuitive, because how can the best moments in your career also be the worst ones? But it's those really painful moments and experiences that forces you to reflect and say, okay, this thing has just happened, which is just absolutely terrible. How do I come back from this to be better? One example that I give a lot of people, and this is normally part of my speech that I charge like $5,000 for, and I'll give it to you guys for free. In the Paralympic trials last year, getting ready for Tokyo, I missed out on qualifying in both of my main events, the 50 and the 100 freestyle. I missed out on qualifying for the 50 freestyle by 0.03 seconds and the 100 meter freestyle by 0.07 seconds. To give you an idea of how long that actually is, if you blink right now, it takes about 0.2 of a second to blink. So a quarter of the time that it takes you to blink was the margin for failure that I essentially had. So I was absolutely destroyed for a couple of days, and I sat back and I tried to think of every single possible little thing that I could have done better to make back that mark. And then, quite thankfully, I was given a second chance by the selectors on the team, and they said, Rowan, we'd still really love to have you be a member of the Paralympic team. And I could have just said, yeah, sure, that's cool, thanks guys, and then keep doing what I was doing before. But I spent those couple of days thinking of every single tiny little thing that I could have done better. Things like making sure I'm getting 8 hours of sleep every night as opposed to 7 or 6.5. Things like making sure I'm actually spending my Sundays as a rest and recovery day instead of going out on Tinder dates. Like all that kind of stuff that you don't realize at the time, but it's those tiny little 1%ers, and it's fixing those 1%ers that will make you a better athlete at that super, super high level. So my biggest failure there and missing the team by a tiny margin ended up making me realize so many of these tiny mistakes that I didn't see I was making. And then I just fixed them over the next 3 months leading into Tokyo. And I honestly, wholeheartedly believe that at trials, if I swam 0.03 seconds faster and I qualified, I would have kept doing what I did before, and I wouldn't have this thing around my neck. I can guarantee you that.
Wow. So that segues really nicely into the final question that we have, which is about the impact of tilt and negative emotions on how you perform and how you play. You've talked a little bit about it in swimming. How does it affect your performance going into? Because you've talked about afterwards and how you kind of come back from it. But going into your races or perhaps going into a game in esports, how do you dismiss that? What are the impacts of that?
It's something that I feel is so much more obvious within an esports environment than within a traditional sporting environment. Now, toxicity is a thing, and toxicity is contagious. If something is toxic, inherently it's contagious as well. So the thing that I found working with Michelle, but also reflecting on previous teams that I had within Counter-Strike, is when there's negative emotions amongst the team, they bleed out. And it spreads like wildfire, and you end up with just a really terrible culture that you don't want to work with and be around. Something that, although right now I'm no longer trying to play esports professionally, what I'm trying to do with a lot of my streaming and my personal brand and content creation in that realm is promoting a positive mental attitude, to the point where a lot of people think it's really annoying and they say, Rowan, why the hell are you so positive all the time? Like, just tilt already, mate, come on. But it's that understanding that the negative emotions they're not helping anyone compete. They're not helping anyone be better. If you are positive and uplifting and trying to build everyone up on your team, not necessarily accepting and just saying, it's really great when you lose, right? Because losing sucks. Like, I'm not in this to lose. I'm in this to try and get better and to try to win and everything. But you can do that in a constructive way and do that in a manner which doesn't breed that negativity. And it's the negativity that makes everyone hate each other, that makes teams die and people shift rosters and just run around in circles.
We're not all angels like you, though, so I'm sure you've worked with a
I
lot
was
of
saying,
people.
Rowan's not a great example of someone who always had tilting, because he was already under control, I think, from his swimming, and he realised, early on in esports that it wasn't going to be useful. But you're going to add something?
I had to pull myself in, honestly, because even as a 16, 17, 18-year-old playing Counter-Strike, like any other teenager in that kind of age where I'm dealing with all my own issues and mopiness and everything, I was incredibly toxic as well. I still had that very similar kind of approach where I wanted to be the absolute best that I could be, but I was getting really, really upset and frustrated at other people that weren't just as committed and dedicated as I was and weren't trying to do exactly the same as I was in that kind of space. I do think it's important when you're playing in a team environment that everyone has very similar goals and aspirations and you're all moving in the same direction together. But it's something like, if I'm playing a ranked game with a bunch of randoms and the random people don't give a damn about whether they win or lose and they just want to have fun, I would get so mad and frustrated and I'd start swearing my head off at them and everything. But how is that going to help you win a ranked game? That just makes it more miserable for myself and miserable for everyone else. And, no one wants to be that kind of person, I think. I don't think anyone wants to be a person that really brings anyone else down unless you're a troll, and screw the trolls, right?
In a team, to do with the comms, we try really hard to make sure there's no negativity on comms. So anyone who dies and sighs, or dies and whacks the desk, we get them to try
I've heard
and
about that before.
mute.
Definitely experienced that before.
We try and get them to mute because it has a devastating effect actually on the team environment. So if you want to eat away at your team environment and not play to your best, then go right ahead, keep the negativity going. But if you're trying to improve, you've got to remove that negativity. And I have a bit of a struggle still with some of my teams I work with where they say, oh, no, it's okay, it's not affecting me. And I'm saying, well, no, it's actually affecting your teammates probably more than you. So try not to express, negative emotion while you're in comms playing the game.
That's the big thing. It's like understanding you're getting negative because you're wanting to win and you're losing. But how does being negative actually help you recover from that and then win? It doesn't, put frankly. So if you understand the motive and the reasoning and everything behind your emotions, and you say, I'm getting negative because I want to win and I'm not winning, what's actually going to help you win is by being positive and being uplifting. So just understanding that one little thing was a massive thing that actually helped me switch into always having that strong positive mindset, because I've recognized that I want to win really badly. Even in my standard ranked games where, I'll solo queue for a day and I'll lose a lot more than I'll win, but I'll still stay positive because I know that staying positive is what's going to help you win in the long run.
If you ever want to listen to Rowan's streams, I think you should, because the way he talks to his teammates and talks about himself during the games, even just ranked, it's worth listening to see, what good comms sounds like.
Twitch.tv/magnetbrain. Get on it.
Had to get that in there. Look, I only competed in esports for a very short time, many years ago, but I do play a lot of ranked. I play a lot of games, and everything you guys are both talking about is resonating. I'm getting a lot of questions. I don't know if you guys are, but that is the part we're up to now.
Okay, great. Who's got some questions for me? Because I want to hear.
Well,
how are we
do you want to switch?
Yeah. Do you want to take the microphone up to people?
Oh, yeah, that's a good idea, actually. That's a great idea. So we're going to do your problem solved live. If no one has a problem to begin with, I have one, but anyone have any problems? Okay, we actually do have quite a few. Do you want to say your name first?
Hi, I'm Harry, and I go by Gloom online.
Yeah, you do.
And my question is about in-game bleeding specifically.
Mm-hmm.
So as an IGL, where do you draw the line between focusing on the macro side of things and yourself as a player?
Yeah, you're the good one to answer that.
I was the pants down IGL, so it's a good question. I think that you need to focus on both. Obviously, there is the macro element, which is with a lot of the strategy and everything, and the micro is about fixing your own personal mistakes and like concentrating on what you can do better with your individual play. The team comes first, So what I like to believe and like to do is say with the players that I was in, we set, I guess, requirements, if you will, so that everyone had to follow a similar routine, whether it is within AIM training or VOD reviews and that kind of stuff, individually, to make sure we're all focusing on our individual play. The IGL just has the added job of working with the coach, who is Christian or Crash, that's sitting right next to you, to help build and develop those strategies. If you don't have a coach, having a coach is definitely a luxury, especially when they're as amazing as the best observer in Australia. But it is that thing where I think that you draw the line by setting the same goals and expectations amongst all the players individually, and you all follow through with that individually. And then on the side of that, you have to do the grunt work, if you will, of coming up with strategies, or if it's Valorant, copy-pasting whatever Paper Rex are doing, and just building on it in that sense.
No one can copy and paste Paper Rex, I'm afraid. They're just on their
They're
own.
just too sharp, honestly, yeah.
They're too random.
But yeah, if that answers your question, it really is just setting those requirements for everyone that's on the team. And then once everyone is doing everything that they can individually to be the best player, then it makes it so much easier as an IGL to do what you're trying to do with the team.
All right, cheers, thank you.
Back there.
All right, we've got quite a few, but I'll go to you next. All right, there you go.
Hey, my name's Sam. It's probably more a question for Michelle, but could you talk a little bit about the relationship? I mean, you talked a lot about how the psychology works with the players, but how do you work with the coaches?
Oh, they're my favourite people to work with. If you work closely with the coach, they already have the relationship with the players, and so if I work with a coach and say, I think it would be better if we do it this way, they can sell it to the players quite easily. So it works very effectively to work through the coach and work closely with them. Would you say, Christian?
100% agree. Yeah. It was good. I think...
Hang on, wait for the mic maybe.
That's probably not a bad idea,
Sorry. Was that the rest of your question? Was that the only question you had? Yeah, thank you.
I think it's good as well because you always have different, perspectives on things. So obviously I'm going to have the coach perspective, but there's only, I'm obviously an outsider looking in, but you're an outsider looking in on me, looking in on the team. So that's an extra set of eyes on the team that I can then speak to. And since the players talk to me and we have that relationship and I have the relationship with you, so when ideas we want more ideas and we want to add more to the table, it's a good way for us to communicate. I bring it to the players. If they're receptive of it, power to them. So it's a way to get, I suppose, just the ideas flowing. And that's what you want in teams. You want ideas, you want people not butting heads with each other, but sometimes you want them to clash on ideas so you can get a better outcome. Because you don't want people just, nonchalantly just agreeing with everything, because that's probably not the best way to go about things. You want discussion, and just more ideas is incredible at the end of the day. So It was great working with you back on that team.
Thank you.
It's always good fun.
All right, I think we have one up here.
I wanted to come back to the last points you were making about team and communications and the slamming the desk and the negativity that some people do. And I know with my son's an adult now and has been gaming since very young. And we talk about it being teams and a team sport. Some of these guys need to realise part of their team is their family members. And so when they're playing...
Family members, did you say, sorry?
Family members.
Yeah, yep.
So when they're playing at home and they're smacking the desk and they're being really negative, that's impacting the family unit within the house as well. So what you've said about that is really, I think, really important for younger people to realise that their family actually want to be there and support them in their endeavours. And but if there's a toxic culture developing because they're very negative about it, they need to address that as well.
It's often to do with the maturity of the player themselves, and going through that age group where they don't really understand. It's at that point it's all about me, and they don't realise what effect they're having on other people. And you're right.
My son's 31 and still does it.
Oh no!
I actually have something I'd love to add to that.
Yeah, go ahead.
One thing that I have found within traditional sport, within swimming, is the power of having a support network around you. And it's understanding that my support network, the reason I won my gold medals, it was not absolutely just because of myself. It's understanding that I also have a team of 4 different swimming coaches, 2 personal trainers, a biomechanic, an exercise physiologist, like a sports psychologist, all of these different people that are helping me reach that. And the thing that overarches a lot of that is also the fact that, as an elite athlete, for a very, very long time, until quite recently, I was not making enough money to be able to be sustainable with what I was doing. And I had to rely on the bank of mum and dad, as I think every person that is an aspiring athlete has to do, because any sporting endeavour is expensive. And that is something that, understanding your support network and understanding what it is that will make you more successful, but what does make you successful at the end of the day is so important. It's something that I've watched a lot of esports players in particular do when they travel overseas from Australia, because they finally land a big contract with a tier 2 or a tier 1 international team. They go over and they struggle when they're overseas because they haven't set up, or they haven't had a proper understanding of the support networks that they need to be successful when they go over. I was chatting to a bunch of the guys last night from Greyhound, and not to single anyone out, but there was a common kind of theme where they were saying that they were so incredibly thankful just to be home, because they were back there again with their families and back in the support networks that they had originally, that made them so successful within Australia that they had the opportunities to be able to travel overseas and perform.
I was with Sonic's Valorant team when they were EXO and going over to America for Sonic's. And one of the things that the team found the hardest, I think, was, just as Rowan says, the basic stuff that you miss when you move away from home, like, how do you set up a bank account in America, and just where the local shops are. And they arrived in COVID time, so they couldn't travel anywhere and no one could take them anywhere. It was a truly horrible time for them trying to get settled. And so it's the importance of, knowing who around you can rely on for help is important. But that doesn't get to your question about how to fix the negativity, though. So what solutions have you tried, and have you given up by now? Oh, we need the microphone up there. Sorry, James.
I'm actually getting more and more involved in it now.
Great.
And Nick plays Counter-Strike. So quite often, when there's a tournament on or something, it's on the television and I ask questions. He explains it to me.
Do you watch the games?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, fabulous.
And that's why I'm here this weekend.
Yeah, fabulous.
Not just to be the bank of mum or the driver. I'm here to learn more and experience it more. I came into the workforce before the days of computers. So I've grown up with them. I can see how important they are now and an important part of our life. And we should encourage that with our children. But we need to also be helping them find a balance and letting them know when the environment is getting a bit toxic, particularly
right.
when you've got slightly younger ones in the house as well.
Mm-hmm.
But also, as a mum, letting teenagers and the younger ones know that you're always there for them, you're always supporting them, but sometimes they have to take responsibility for their negativity and what they're doing.
Correct.
And pulling them up on it, but just still encouraging them and supporting them.
Yep.
And not saying to them, like when Nick first started, that's a stupid thing to be doing. Those all-night LAN parties, with 6 other mates in my house. What are they doing? Well, they're off the streets, they're not drinking.
Yeah, you're a great mum. I wish we had more like you.
Well, you've got to support your kids. That's
Absolutely.
The only way they stick around and don't get into trouble.
Yeah. So if you're a player in the room here, get your parents involved, let them hear comms. I'm sure someone on your team probably records the matches with comms. Let them hear the comms and hear how you're going. I know it's a bit scary because everyone speaks fine, I'm sure. But try to explain a little bit and help them come into your world a bit, because having your parents want to support you, and if you let them in, that's going to be better for your relationship, I think.
Yeah, I think everyone in esports has a story about how they talk about it to their family and how they brought their family into it. And I think that it really comes down to understanding is the most important thing. And yeah, having good communication. Funnily enough, it's the same thing that we're talking about in the game as well.
Yeah, right. Surprise.
Yeah. All right, we'll take some more questions.
Hi guys. Kind of in a similar vein to the last question, but I feel as though through mainstream media, gaming and video games have been quite demonised for how they can make younger kids violent and things like that. And I know that there's been a lot of studies that have shown that there's not necessarily a correlation there. But I'd like to know in your experiences how effective esports psychology practices can positively affect your life outside of gaming.
The thing that I try to talk about with parents when they're not sure whether their kids should be involved is I talk to them about how the crossover skills they're getting playing the game actually will help them in real life. So things like leadership and organising a team and just being reliable and turning up and all those sorts of skills, they're things that employers value, and even though their son or daughter may not be doing that in a job right now, they're doing that in esports, it could lead to a career in esports, which their parents probably have no concept about what is out there as an industry, what jobs are available. So if you try and explain it to them in terms of the sports industry, that probably makes a lot of sense for them. But and you just say, look, it translate well for esports as well. So did I answer the question? I'm sorry.
I think that's a good job.
I think one thing on that with the whole violent video games are making kids violent kind of thing. I feel like, there's been a good amount of legitimately well done research that proves that isn't the case. But to me, the point for concern is with esports, it is an environment where, especially in ranked games, more so than in tournaments, you're not necessarily punished for toxicity and negative behaviour. So you can have a lot of young people as they're growing up playing these games that don't get any form of negative feedback for being extremely toxic, racist, sexist, homophobic, etc. And if all they're getting is other people saying, haha, that's funny, and it's getting that positive reinforcement and re-encouragement, that's the thing that I think can be extremely dangerous for a lot of young people growing up playing esports. So it's a massive reason and a factor behind why I'm trying to encourage and promote positive, positive mental attitudes, is because it helps the community and it helps you play better, but it helps a lot of these younger people that are coming through if there are more good role models that are always positive on their microphones when they're playing these games, because it can break that negative feedback loop that is just building and building, and it means we have more people that are friendlier to be around in the scene.
Thanks, guys.
I was going to say too that it's not just about toxicity. It's about when you're at a pro level player or aiming to be pro level player, the number of hours you have to put into play means that they're hours away from family and away from regular life things. And so whenever I work with teams, I'm always conscious of making sure that players have at least 2 days off a week to be normal people, preferably on the weekends when their friends also have days off as well, because you want your players not to be so insular that they can't interact with people outside of the game. So when I'm working with a team, I'm making sure, hopefully, my players are actually developing normal lives as well as trying to get to the top in esports as well.
And that's so important. I've found in swimming, I have had periods of time where I have dropped everything else. I've dropped all forms of academic study, I've dropped work, stopped playing esports, every single thing that wasn't swimming, I dropped for about 12 months to just focus on what I'm doing in the pool and the pool alone. And what I found was when I got to the World Championships in 2019, which was the year I tried this, I put so much pressure on myself to perform because that's all I had. Every living, waking moment, all I was thinking about was swimming in competition, that when I got to the competition, I cracked. And I messed up in both of my races. Still did okay, I won 2 bronze medals, which is damn cool, but I wanted gold. I didn't get it. So it's that understanding that what has made me more successful now is actually having balance, is having other circles and other things in my life that I can do that gives me that variety, gives me, honestly, other things to stress about, which is so important because you need to be able to take a step back from what you're doing and to do something else and then come back to it if you want a fresher perspective and you want to better understand what you can do to be better.
Like all things in life, it's about balance. Yeah. Anyone? I'll go over here.
Hey, my name is Greg, and this is kind of like a double question for me and my mate Nico. We play Rainbow Six, and after like a few ranked games, we kind of get like a bad like mental after we have a few losses. So we were just kind of wondering some step-by-step ways to, I guess, instantly improve like the environment, or guess how do you over time just like get a strong mental, like how you were saying when you play your ranked games, you just keep positive the whole time?
Well, I guess for me, it's understanding that I have a positive mental the whole time, because I understand that I play better when I do have a positive mental. So if I catch myself in a moment where I am feeling those negative emotions and thoughts, I just think to myself, how is this helping me win? I'm playing because I want to win, and if I want to win, I need to be in a better mood. I need to be bringing everyone up. The other thing is the fact that when you're in a team, the levels of like arousal and emotional amongst the team, everyone has different points that they perform at their best, but everyone sits at around the same level when they are competing. So it's understanding that you need to make sure that everyone is always at that optimal kind of level. And if you see someone is starting to drop, then that's where, like, we had some strategies that we used in Pants Down that Michelle can probably talk about to try and
It'll be
either
in our
lift,
next time's podcast, but
like,
yes, we can talk about it here.
like lift people's levels back up to that level, or just bring them down a little bit to that level where you know you're able to hold that positive attitude. It's just recognizing that and saying if someone is being really negative, trying to do what you can to bring them up, because if they're up, then everyone is up and all is good. And if they're up way too high, then just say, hey, take a deep breath, or let's have a timeout, and just use this tack timeout to kind of mentally reset and say, yeah, this was all awesome, but let's calm down because we got to start thinking about the next round, the next 3-4 rounds and the rest of the half, and what we can do to actually win the whole match or series.
Yep, good one, Rowan.
It's a very pragmatic way to look at it. Don't want to get tilted because I won't play as well when I'm tilted, and I want to play well. All right, who's next?
My question is about, it's pretty general. It's about pressure. We know that at certain moments of the game, it's very high pressure, high stress. What tips would you have, because there's external pressure and also internal pressure, maybe pressure you put on yourself because of the importance of the game. What would you say to your team, say, before the match, and maybe during the match, say they called a timeout because, the heat of the moment, they're just taking time out to take a breather. For example, you're on match point and you can't close up the game. You've just lost 5 rounds in a row, and the pressure is mounting on the team. It's like, do you have any tips to overcome that?
Well, that would normally be the coach calling the timeout, not the sports psychologist, and I can't talk during those ones. So, no. So, the 3 deep breaths part is a really important one for trying to get back into control. The way that you try and deal with it, the perceived external pressure. I mean, we're here at a major competition, for instance, and my team, like yesterday, they were playing for a trip to Orlando, and I could hear the commentators, mentioning every 30 seconds or so, and the pressure is on the team, and they're about to play for $10,000 on a trip to Orlando, and actually, I don't think it ever crossed my team's mind. We talked about Orlando and wanted to qualify, top 3, and that was a given. But in all of our games, that was never mentioned at any point. In the last couple of weeks, we've not talked about it in the slightest. All our focus is on playing round by round. And if we can maximise the number of rounds that we win, we'll do the best we can. And if it's good enough, we'll get to Orlando. But if it's not, there's next year. It's not the end of the world. So it's trying to take the pressure right off the players so that it's not a be all and end all. Actually, it's a funny thing because I've worked with teams where I'm telling this to all my team and, saying, like, it's not the end of the world. It's okay. We're just going to do it round by round and play our best. And the org owner comes in and says, okay, this is the one we really want to win. And everything's hanging on this. And I was like, oh no, this is not what I want to hear. But, for them, that's really important, but it's not what will help the team. So I want to go back to, round by round, guys, and just do the best you can. Listen to comms, play your best. You can do it. Gives you confidence.
Cool, thanks for that.
I think it's this kind of thing where you're not successful as a team because you play in major tournaments. You're successful as a team because of the culture and the values that you have and the way that you play as a team. So it's bringing it back to say, why always think about the extrinsic stuff, the awards and the light at the end of the tunnel kind of thing where, hey, there's this really cool opportunity if we win this game. How does the existence of that opportunity being there actually help you in the moment to win the game? It doesn't. So, yeah, you're motivated and you want to win these things, but everyone already knows that. So why focus on that when you can just talk more about the things within the game, and if everyone's really starting to feel that pressure in the moment.
Sorry, Rowan, also winning a tournament isn't always in your control. You don't know how well the other team has prepared themselves, and so it's not in your control. And I'm talking to my team always about working on the things they can control. And so, where you position yourself and how you're listening to your teammates and how you're giving information, they're the things in your control. And so if you do those right, the outcome will look after itself.
I can speak from a commentator's perspective. We are always doing the opposite of what you want.
You and I have had this discussion.
Yeah. So our job as commentators is to make it exciting, is to talk about how much pressure there is. And we love talking about how it's the opposite of what the sports psychologists and the players are trying to do, which is trying to relieve that pressure as much as possible.
We take no notice of you, James.
I know that you guys watch with my casts muted, and I think that's for the best. All right, I think we had a question up here.
Hey, this is more to Rowan, but I wanted to talk more about, I guess, away from a team-based environment into, like, say, ranked and solo queue matches. How do you make sure that you're always improving and focusing on that, like, 1% to make you better when there's just so many variables that come into play with, like, your different teammates, different communication, different environments? How do you make sure you're not plateauing, but you're always still improving despite all these differences in the environment?
Just let me add one more. When you're doing that, how do you avoid burnout if you've been doing this for a very long period of time?
Okay, so I guess it's a bit of a two-parter. If you want to play well and focus on improvement in your ranked games, the reality is that it is very, very difficult to work on the macro, because especially in a ranked game where there's no coordination and no in-game leader, then it's chaos. Ranked is always chaos. So the things you can do are working on your micro, working on your spacing, working on, let's say,
your lineups.
If it's Valorant and you're playing let's say an initiator instead of a duelist, often you're not going to be the first person that's in, you'll be the second or the third or fourth person that is entering your site. So it's then saying, all right, with this, I'm going to work on my trades and make sure whatever my duelist is doing, that if they get picked, which, I mean, every jet main always gets picked without actually getting a kill, that you can trade them. Or if you don't, then it's thinking, okay, if I just died in this round, what did I do wrong with my micro? What could I have done that was better in this situation within hindsight? And then saying, all right, yep, I could have done this better. I could have swung out to make this play, or I should have just sat still to play for time or whatever else. And then moving on and saying, all right, in the next round, I'm going to try this or that or whatever else. It's really working on the micro. And I guess as far as burnout goes, when it comes to the pure like esports professional trying to get as good as possible at these games, even though it's gaming and it's not swimming or running or exercise, there is an extreme component of mental fatigue and intellectual fatigue. After a long time of playing, you do start to get tired, and whether you realize it or not, because there's always that dopamine rush that's going on, you do start to make poor decisions and lose that ability to create the kind of really good decisions that you will do at the start of a session. So it's understanding if you want to get on and play a couple of ranked games because you want to work on your micro, you're specific about what it is that you want to work on within the moment, and maybe you set a goal for the entire match. But then you also say, I'm only going to play for 2 or 3 hours or something, because this is the time that I know that I can create quality decisions and quality thoughts. And at that point, if you keep playing, that is where, once you've lost that actual focus for what you're doing, the quality of your practice drops. And it's also the fact that if you're doing that, it means you're setting a routine for yourself and a schedule for how much you are committing to the game. If you just play and play and play, and there's no schedule, there's no rhyme or reason behind why you're doing it, then that's where you can start to build a lot more of an addiction to these kinds of things, and that's where the burnout can come in, because you're just playing and playing and playing all the time, and then all of a sudden one day you'll just get sick of it and you won't want to play anymore.
Right. Can I just demonstrate something?
Sure.
Thank you. I just need this with it. One of my teams earlier this year, 8-ballers, was at a LAN, and we met up for the first time. So it was really, really super exciting to meet up with your teammates for the first time. And we had, I think, 10 days together, maybe 7 days together before we had a couple of LANs together. And so that we booked out Fortress for like 10 hours a day, and we were busy training and scrimming and learned so much. It was great. But I only realised afterwards how burned out we were, and I should have taken more care in, I guess, talking to the coach more too, about how we scheduled our training to try and avoid burnout. So I wanted to use this sort of a demonstration of, like, when you're coming along to a boot camp, and you've got this much knowledge already in your brain, and at boot camp it sort of fills up, so your water bottle now is like this full, and you're good to go because everything's great. But there's still a few more days to go, and the risk is that players will want to keep filling up their level, their water bottle, with more and more knowledge, but the water is now spilling out over the sides. And nothing, when you're in a burnout position, nothing is going right. You're making mistakes because the water is filling out over the top. The mistakes are happening. And it's a really difficult position to be in because, without immediate rest, you're not going to be playing at your best. The team is not going to be playing at its best. So one of the things I have to be really conscious of is when I'm working with teams, in the lead up to a competition, I like them to have like a lighter day right before a tournament so they can mentally freshen up so that they're able to perform at their best. I've learned some of this stuff since pandemic. I'm sorry about that. Just being more aware of, what workload you're under, especially, when everyone's so excited to be together at a boot camp, for instance, and you want to get more stuff in there. You've got to be careful that too much is sometimes worse for you. You've got to really pay a lot of attention to getting it right. So that was my demonstration.
And I have a question for you, Michelle.
Oh, yes.
So we talk a lot about esports in the formal context. Most of the time I'm just playing video games for fun with my mates, playing some rank games, grinding for champion or whatever the top rank is. And sometimes we talked a lot about what you can do to regulate yourself in terms of your anxieties or your stress or your tilt when things get a bit negative, when you're losing. What kind of things can you do when your teammates are struggling? How can you support them and help lift them up? Perhaps they're not receptive to it. Perhaps they're on the tilt and it's starting to affect you.
Right.
How do you, prevent yourself from getting affected by that? Because as you said, toxicity and tilt, it's very contagious. And how do you help support them, especially if maybe they don't want to?
So firstly, usually your teammates know they're making mistakes and they don't want them pointed out. So you don't point out the mistakes, but you do try to, it's like parenting 101. You do try to notice when they're doing things right and are helpful, and you encourage them during the rounds. And so you want them to build up a bit more confidence because, as soon as everything gets... You might be losing by a whole lot. Everyone stops talking and no one wants to take risks. And so if you're doing the opposite of that and you're trying to encourage your teammates more and recognising good plays, then they'll take more risks because they say, okay, it's okay with my teammates, I've got that relationship. And things start to improve that way. So
So yeah, that's actually links to another interesting point. I will open up the floor in a second again as well, but I kind of want to hog the mic while I have it. So taking risks is something, like you said, people want to mitigate when they're lacking their confidence, but you're actually saying it's encouraging to take risks. You think
encourage them with when you've built up their confidence a little bit. So, it gets me to another area, because yes, I'm involved in a lot of performance type stuff with teams, but I work with a lot of players who have mental health issues, and as a psychologist I can work in that area. So anxiety and depression are quite common. I mean, amongst the general population we're talking about 16 to 20%, and it's probably not much different, maybe slightly higher in esports. So the toxicity or stuff that you might hear might actually be anxiety from them or depression from them at a mental illness type level that I need to work in. So it may not necessarily just be straightforward, from the game itself. So
yeah, great. All right, anyone else have any more questions, problems to solve?
Hi, I've been wanting to ask this question for days, but I don't know how to best articulate it, and it kind of relates back to my mum's comment of rage. When I was younger, I went a bit too hard, too fast, too young, and it resulted in an RSI in which I could have actually had to have had my arm amputated. But
I'm sorry, I can't hear you very well.
Sorry, I ended up with an injury where I almost had to have my arm amputated.
Oh, wow.
But luckily avoided it through minor surgery. And because of that, my skill level has, I guess you'd say, slipped, and I can't play as long as I'd like to, and otherwise it would have to be amputated. How does one deal with that sort of...
It's going into that sort of goal setting idea of, before you had this injury, you had an idea about where you wanted to get to. But now with that injury, you have to reevaluate, okay, what are my actual possibilities here? And it's adjusting your goals and understanding that, your goals aren't always going to be fixed. They have to be a little bit malleable depending on the timing of things. And so just being understanding for yourself that I may not be able to get to that goal at the moment, but I'm working on this goal right now. So setting the right sort of stepping stones for yourself will lead to that improvement.
Thank you.
I feel like from a perspective of someone that has a disability that impairs their coordination, that loves esports, that are like 99.9% reliant on your ability to coordinate your muscles, to be able to aim, for the muscle memory, for spray control and all of CSN and Val. It's something that I feel is very much, regardless of things like injuries, there's always ways that you can work around for your skill development and other strategies and things that you can incorporate to still be able to reach extremely high levels of success. But it comes down to being malleable and taking a different approach. One thing that I was very well known for back when I used to play Counter-Strike was the meta for the game was, as is now, everyone was using AKs and M4s on T and CT. And I started using the COD guns, the SG and the AUG. And I used them because the spray control patterns were much simpler. Like with an AK, you have to go down, left, right, left in a bunch of very specific kind of angles and directions. And you have to change it at the right time. And it's something that I knew I struggled with immensely due to having muscle memory issues. Whereas with the SG and the AUG, all you need to do is pull down in the one speed in the one direction. Much, much simpler for me to be able to achieve and pull off. So when I started using these kinds of guns and taking my own path, I realized that, hang on, these things are actually ridiculously bloody good. How on earth has Valve not nerfed them yet? And then you fast forward 6 months and they buff them because no one's using them. It was crazy. But that thing where it's realizing, okay, you do need to take sometimes a different approach, look at things through a different lens, and then say, regardless of whatever a meta is and whatever else other people may be doing, what can you do with your own personal approach and your skill set and what you can and can't do to maximize your ability to be able to perform?
Another thing is too, Rowan didn't start out as being in the IGL for Pants Down straight up. We had a couple of IGLs before that. And when Rowan became the IGL, because of CP we wanted to take more, longer breaks between maps, and we negotiated that with the teams because that was in Rowan's best interest, our team's best interest, because he's carrying the heavy load of being IGL. So there's a mental load as well as a physical load you need to be aware of. That you make adjustments for, that you do what will lead to your good performance within the game as much as possible.
It's something which is really interesting that I think, because I have a disability which can be considered invisible, if you take a photo of me, if you don't know what to look for and what the telltale kind of signs are, you have no idea at all that I do actually have a disability. But within esports, it's a thing that can actually impact me very significantly. Not just within control of like mouse movements, but with tension within how I'm holding and using my hand, within communication as well, understanding the fact that neurological fatigue is a really significant thing for me, which is why we took the breaks, because as I would get more tired, not only would my ability to aim decrease, but my ability to cognitively process situations and events and call strategies would be infected, as well as my speaking ability would be impaired as well. So I would start to stumble over a lot more of my words, or potentially make the wrong call-outs and saying A site instead of B site kind of thing, because as I get tired, my brain starts to default back to the pathways where it's using quite severely injured areas. So it's understanding, okay, fatigue has a significant impact on my ability to play well. So what can I do to mitigate and minimize that impact?
Probably have time for one more question. Anyone? All right. Here we go.
So this one's more for Rowan, and it's like very similar to that. So in between the maps or the games, like what kinds of things did you do to either like reset that fatigue, or did you like get up and walk around, those types of things? Like what types of things did you do?
Disconnecting from the fact that I'm sitting in front of a screen was always really great. So being able to turn around, stand up out of my chair and have a glass of water and do something to kind of step out before I can then step back in was great. Something else which is really good that I used for a while and pants down was, I guess, the opposite. Instead of trying to reset, and whether it's bring myself back down or recover from a map, if I noticed that my emotional levels were too low and I needed to pick it up, what I would literally do, because I had a pretty long headphone cable at the time, while everyone's talking and doing whatever, I'd get up out of my seat and I'd do 10 push-ups just to raise my heart rate, to raise all the funny fast brain juices that are flowing. And then that would get me good, on a good baseline to kick the map off. Because, hey, I'm tired or something, I need to be awake, I need to be alert. What can I do right now? I can either do push-ups because it's at the start and I know it's not a fatigue thing, or if it is a fatigue thing, that's when I say, okay, at this point I need to take that rest so I can come back and be good.
All right, sweet. Thank you.
Is there any final things you'd like to touch on, Michelle?
There's stuff that we could have discussed, and if we had more time, we will get into it. We'll save them for the podcast coming up. So do follow me or follow us on PocketPsych Pod, because that will tell you when this one is going to be put out on video for you to be able to watch, but also future episodes, which are likely to be in a studio. And we're going to be talking about a whole lot of themes and teaching you how to use sports psychology skills. So do make sure you follow PocketPsych Pod. Yes, thank you. The link isn't actually on there, though.
Well, the link to our Twitters are on there. So, Michelle, people want to follow you. They go to
please do.
At PocketPsych on Twitter. Yourself?
If you follow me, Magnet Brain on Twitter, Magnet Brain on Twitch. I guess the only other thing is I've been running a little thing all weekend where for everyone that gets a photo with me and tags me on Twitter and posts it on Twitter, I'm donating $3 to the Starlight Foundation for each photo. So if anyone has a Twitter account and wants to get a happy snap, come up after this. I'm more than happy to.
Feel how heavy the metal is. It's very heavy.
This thing is 0.5 kilo, and honestly, walking around wearing it all weekend, my neck is so sore.
I can see around your neck how red it is.
Yeah. But yeah, if you want a photo, come up. More than happy. Have a chat. I'm around and just happy to be here.
So as Michelle mentioned, we're launching a podcast. We're going to be doing regular live streams and uploading episodes. So make sure you follow us, PocketPsych Pod, on Twitter. And yeah, thanks everyone for coming.
Yeah, thanks everyone.